So one way out of this without modal collapse is a high price to pay. Perhaps a lower price to pay would be what's called Mereological Nihilism. And I'm sure you've
Ah,
probably,
yes, good old Mereological Nihilism.
yeah. And for anybody listening later, or I know everybody in the audience knows what it is, but for anybody listening later, Mereological Nihilism is the view that there are no composite objects, that there's just arrangements of things. But really, it's also called object conventionalism, where we just refer to objects by convention, but there's not actually composite objects that exist. And so there's in that case, what they would say is, well, there is no Frank. Not really. And so there is no diminished Frank. And so if there is no Frank, then Frank isn't identical to anything because there's no Frank. You're just referring to a bunch of parts. And so, of course, parts T through 1, T through 4 are not identical to 6. But it wouldn't be the case that Frank is possibly identical to DF because there is no Frank. There's just parts T1 through T6. That would be sort of one way out. Part of the problem there is that dramatically fragment. I mean, that expands on all of the problems that we've spoken of before, as far as moral praiseworthiness and memories and all that kind of stuff. Because now there literally is no Frank. That's one problem. Another problem is that if the person putting forward that view is a physicalist, then they have a serious problem. Because we know that we exist through introspection. I know that I'm a self. I exist, and the physicalist wants to say that I am a composite object, that I'm my brain, perhaps, or my brain and my body. But there are no composite objects on Mereological Nihilism. So if the critic wants to embrace Mereological Nihilism, then what they would have to say is that the self that you know yourself to be through introspection is a simple. It's not composed of parts because there are no composite objects. And so it couldn't be your brain or your body. And so it seems like you would have to be an immaterial soul. And then we can say, all right, well, look, if you want to embrace Mereological Nihilism, well, let's talk about how God's the best explanation for the existence of souls and minds, right? And so Mereological Nihilism could actually help in that way. I would actually prefer just to reject Mereological Nihilism. First of all, it certainly seems to us that there are objects. So it would be highly counterintuitive to say that no, in fact, there's no objects. That's all just what we see. I mean, there is an object conventionalism. Well, there's a reason why there's an object conventionalism, because we seem to recognize that there are objects. And there's also sort of composite properties where, like, for example, and I actually talked about this with our Discord week or so ago. I have a 3-year-old, so time just kind of blends together, sort of like the B theory, I suppose. Anyway, where if you think of like a car, for example, and actually I made a slide for this one, so let me go ahead and put it up. So if you think of a car, the car's parts come together, and it's posting now. The car's parts come together, and they make the ability to drive, right? So like you have all these parts together, and they have the ability to drive, but none of the parts individually have the ability to drive. They only have the ability to drive as a composite object. It's the car that has the ability to drive. It's not the muffler. It's not the the piston or that kind of thing. And so we have and you might say like, well, yeah, but the ability to drive is nothing but the collection of these properties of these parts, right? But the problem there is you still only get the composite property by putting these parts together in a particular way. And so it seems like you can't really get away from composite properties because you have to you have to put the composite object back together to explain how these properties come together to make the composite properties. And like, for example, the ability to drive, or the fact that water has cohesion and adhesion. Well, you have to put the hydrogen and the oxygen together in a particular way to get one side negative and the other positive. You don't get that absent the composite object of them being put together. And so since we have composite properties, it seems like the bearer of those properties is the composite object. Since it can't be any individual of the parts, it has to be the whole taken together. And so that would be at least one reason to affirm the existence of composite objects. And then, of course, there's the other considerations as far as like we certainly seem to have experiences of composite objects, and then if he denies the existence of the soul, then he's going to have a real problem there. Any thoughts on that?
Well, funny you said that because he does deny the existence of a soul. So, uh,
Yeah. So he's going the modal collapse route rather than the mereological nihilism. So, yeah, if he's a physicalist that affirms composite objects, then yeah, I guess modal collapse then would be the way he'd have to go.
yeah, I mean, like just like something that really came to mind as you were speaking is um, the the fact that you have to construct such a counterintuitive worldview to
Hmm.
avoid theism is quite interesting. Like it's like you really do have to generate counterintuitive metaphysics to steer clear of theism, which I just find really interesting.
Yeah, and that's certainly not something pejorative or to put down. In fact, the cosmic skeptic, I can't, Alex something, I,
Alex O'Connor.
Alex O'Connor. There you go. Thank you for that. I was going to be really bad to forget his name, but he had an interview with Dr. Craig a while back on the Kalam.
Yeah, no, I remember it. It was a
Yeah,
great one.
and he actually pointed that out at one point. It's like, okay, well, and he actually brought up mereological nihilism, and he pointed out like, okay, well, yeah, I guess. And after Craig gave a response, he's like, yeah, I guess. How many of your intuitions are you really willing to give up to maintain a worldview? And yeah, I think that's a fair point. Is like, there's a price to be paid when you give up these intuitions, and that's on both sides, right? So I mean, we better have pretty good reasons to think that people can rise from the dead, or to think that when we die, we're going to live past that. And so there's certainly some counterintuitive things on Christianity too. I'm not going to say like it's all one sided, but
Mm.
I think that we would want to have good reasons. And so asserting brute facts that are counterintuitive for me seems kind of problematic if you don't have some kind of good set of arguments or reasons for affirming those. Thank you for listening. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. Please also look at the show notes in order to find a link to our group so that you can join our next discussion. I look forward to chatting with you.